to interest destroys anything and everything else around it. So, in truth, nonetheless, you ask for a model in part of your statements. In truth, the model exists. What is the model? In truth, the failure of this system is in an inverse expression of the rectitude of mathematically perfected economy. What do I mean by that? Well, suppose you have this $100,000 home, which might be a $35,000 home built in 1963, which is actually $1 million home now that you're paying whatever $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month for it. It would cost you $17 a month from the time it was built under mathematically perfected economy. The point of the matter, nonetheless, is if we reappraised it to its cost of production in today's system, less all the principal and interest that have been paid against it, and so refinance that debt under mathematically perfected economy, we would either eliminate, having already justly resolved, the entire sum of indebtedness ever multiplied against it, and or we would leave a tiny fraction of the debt to be serviced at a tiny fraction of today's costs. In that fact that whatever today's costs are versus what the costs would be under mathematically perfected economy, by counting all prior payments of interest instead toward principal and paying the remaining principal, if any, at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the remaining value of the property over the remaining lifespan of the property, we have in this very system the actual model of the math that would be mathematically perfected economy. So, in truth, we're not very credible citizens of this vehicle of self-government if we can't see that from the facts that exist. Now, if you wanted to insulate some geographic region, we can do that as well, but we can't commingle that region's commerce with a currency subject to interest, because it will consume and dedicate all of the interest-free currency eventually to servicing the multiplication of artificial indebtedness in respect to the currency which is subject to interest. In effect, you take the entire owed principal and apply the diminished overall rate of interest which would exist to determine an overall rate of interest that is effectively applied to the interest-free currency. So there's no insulating, a perfected currency from a system of usury, because interest, any rate of interest which has to be reborrowed to maintain a vital circulation, inherently and irreversibly multiplies the sum of artificial indebtedness in proportion to the circulation until we suffer the present terminal failure. So we can't just throw some money in the system, even not subject to interest. In fact, if you will, you can see in the very events which are around us now an example of the answer that I just gave you. Because practically since Ronald Reagan took office, he promised that he would balance the federal budget and eliminate price inflation by reducing federal taxes 10% per year for 3 years. He failed to do that. I had provided him mathematic proofs that it was impossible to accomplish that object for a simple reason. We had double-digit price inflation. We had double-digit prime rates in the Federal Reserve System. Okay, by double digit, I mean more than 10% price inflation. Now, being as that's an annual increase of more than 10% of the cost of all things, and being as federal taxes are a fraction of the cost of all things, it's mathematically impossible to increase 10%, a fraction of the cost of all things, 10%, and to even account or offset then the cost of all things increasing more than 10%. Simple math, second grade math, again, you see. But Reagan went ahead and did it Anyway, and it failed. And in the end of that failure, they called me and they wanted to know if I could project the maximum possible lifespan, and I provided these computer models for the Reagan administration. But so what happened? He restored the tax rates that had existed before, and they've never gone up since. While Reagan accumulated trillions of debt during his 2 terms, during GHW Bush's term, it escalated at a like rate, and it's generally escalated even further beyond that since, except that the lying of federal government has gotten worse. For instance, Bill Clinton claimed he balanced the federal budget. No way in the world did he balance the federal budget. But that's a huge further subject. But here's the thing. So what's happening, although this further money that's been poured into circulation since Reagan took office, we're not even servicing the debt, the further debt that's been accumulated. If we were, taxes would have to increase accordingly. Okay, so we're not even servicing the debt. Okay, the money's been poured into circulation, and although it's theoretically subject to interest, we're not paying any interest on it. In fact, we're not even paying the principal. And has it solved the problems? No, because the remainder of this circulation remains subject to interest, so that a tremendous volume of money is being paid out of circulation in the way of principal and interest, servicing an already terminal sum of debt, while we accumulate further debt beyond that by pouring money into circulation. You see? So, no. In truth, all the money that the federal government is pouring into circulation is a proof that that can't succeed, because the falsified sum of escalated indebtedness is just swallowing that up like an abomination that makes everything desolate around it.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
That was a heck of a response.
Well, I try to be accountable. We have all these politicians, and, my work has forced me many years ago to account for all these things. I actually proposed the means of artificial suspension to the Reagan administration that they're doing right now, to prove it was criminal and that it would only artificially sustain a terminal failure, us against terminal failure for some brief while committing the further crime against us of suspending us in the terminal state for all the longer. What solves our problem? Do we owe this money to the banks? Or did we actually incur what is a rightful obligation to pay and retire principal from circulation? It's not a debt to the banks, and we're concerned about our debts to China and Greece and Italy and all that. China's proposed to loan these countries money to float them a while longer. Well, China's just learned the game. It's learned the game from our central bank. It's hoping to perpetrate the crime on further countries of the world. And just to give you an idea, my websites are off limits to Chinese citizens. Get virtually no traffic from China. During the Olympics, when George Bush was president, I finally responded to people who were pleading with me to, put the Chinese debt issue into perspective. And there's reasons why I've, been somewhat reluctant to do it. Number one, my plagiarists imitate me so much that you won't even know who wrote the original article in 2 weeks. The other thing is, there is some hope that China will adopt mathematically perfected economy. What you don't realize is there are countries with rising movements and many disparate monetary reform movements who have agreed that mathematically perfected economy is the only monetary solution. And after all, it's second grade math. There's one and one only solution for inflation and deflation. There's one and one only solution for inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest. And there is one and one only solution for systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, which is the integral combination of the first and third solutions. So, this is second grade math. When you define inflation and deflation as increases or decreases in circulation per goods and services or represented value per whatever, then the only thing that solves both inflation and deflation is to maintain a circulation which at all times is equal to whatever. You see? And so this is just elementary math. I mean, we should be ashamed of ourselves that we've suffered already one Great Depression across the world. So anyway, I did one article about the Chinese debt thing, and I refrained from, how do I say this? I refrained from, pointing a nasty finger at the Chinese, who I personally would like to welcome into what's wrongly called the democratic world, which in fact, is a terrible misusage of terms. We are not a democracy; we're a republic. When Benjamin Franklin left the Constitutional Convention, a woman called out to him. She says, "Mr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us?" And he shouted back to her above the crowd. He says, "A republic." And then he thought, and he added, "If you can keep it." You see? Now, the only way that we're going to have peace in the world is that we have justice. And justice is a common object of all mankind. And so I had to delicately write this article about Chinese resolution of debt. We won't resolve the debt to China, suffering under further multiplication of artificial indebtedness by these systems. We won't resolve the debt to anyone. We will all, if we live these systems out to their last moment, everyone will be dispossessed of everything. So I tried to delicately treat this in a blog article that I wrote. And I had no traffic from China, as I mentioned. And all of a sudden, I've got 200 unique visitors to my pages every day for a month from China. China is visiting my pages intensely, and I've got visitor stats where I can see when people climb on a page, what page they go to next, how many minutes they spend on each. These people are not just browsing around. There are hundreds of probably diligent scholars who are carefully studying my every word. And the next thing you see in the news, and you would have no way of associating this with that event, is that the Chinese are here in the United States demanding, if they can, that the Bush administration at least make initial payments against these debts with the gold, which is in our treasury, you see. So there's profound effects of the truth across the world. Many of my plagiarists have taken my parable of perfect economy, and they've advocated spending money into circulation. Well, the whole reason, one of the principal reasons for that essay is to teach that you can't spend money into circulation. Well, why didn't they get it? They didn't get it because when Jacques Jaquerin plagiarized me in his debt virus, I took down the explanations that it was an event in history, so that every website that borrowed that story and was selling it for money and was proposing that you could spend money into circulation, I could finger as a plagiarist of my work, because it's my work and it's not a historic event. You can't get it from anywhere but my work. Or indirectly from another plagiarist, which meant that you plagiarized a plagiarist, is all, which is no defense for plagiarism, And I'm not doing this for, my own good. I mean, you can't imagine, what it's been like to fight all these wars, against all these, preposterous propositions like social credit and Austrian economists and Keynes and you name them, whoever the purported economist is. You see, I'm not an economist.